In the grand marble halls of Meridian Financial's flagship branch, a quiet storm was brewing. A black woman, poised and dignified, stood at the teller counter, her simple withdrawal request met with disdainful sneers and whispered insults. She wasn't loud. She wasn't aggressive. But the very air around her grew thick with humiliation as each second ticked by. Staff exchanged mocking glances, customers whispered, and the manager, oozing false authority, prepared to remove her from the premises. They saw her modest clothing, her natural hair, and presumed she was out of place. But they had made a critical mistake. In just a few minutes, their entire reality would crumble. Because the woman they belittled was Angela Freeman, the CEO of the very institution they served. And this quiet humiliation would ignite a transformation the banking world would never forget. Before we dive into this story of dignity, reckoning, and irreversible change, comment where you're watching from and hit the subscribe button so you never miss true stories of power, justice, and redemption. Now brace yourself. The reckoning begins. Angela Freeman stood at the counter, her withdrawal slip neatly filled out, her ID pristine, her posture composed. Yet the room seemed to close in on her. Teller Beth hesitated, glancing nervously at the slip. A withdrawal of $115,000 was significant, but not extraordinary for a Meridian Platinum client. Still, the color of Angela's skin and her modest attire seemed to warp the usual protocols. Beth whispered something to Mark, the senior teller, whose smirk appeared before he even approached. Mark towered behind Beth, arms folded, his body language screaming suspicion. Without waiting for an explanation, he spoke loudly enough for the surrounding customers to hear. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he had already decided there was. Angela remained calm. "No problem. I'm simply withdrawing funds from my account," she answered, her voice even, betraying none of the humiliation tightening her chest. Richard, another staff member, drifted over, his sneer undisguised. "Probably one of those money schemes," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for nearby customers to catch. Laughter rippled through the marble lobby. Angela stood still, feeling every eye settle on her. She was no longer a client requesting a service. She was a spectacle, an unwelcome presence. An elderly white woman clutched her purse tighter. A young mother pulled her children closer. Even the security guard, barely out of training, shifted uncomfortably at his post. Beth, sensing the atmosphere darken, asked to see Angela's ID again. Angela obliged, sliding it across without a word. Her ID, her bank card, her withdrawal slip, all perfectly valid. But her presence was treated like an anomaly, an intrusion. "These types of transactions," Mark began ominously, before trailing off into insinuations about fraud and unusual activity. Angela didn't flinch. She knew this wasn't about security, it was about perception. In the hierarchy that played out silently in every polished lobby like this one, her skin color spoke louder than her credentials. Jessica Keller, the branch manager, entered the scene with an exaggerated air of authority. She didn't introduce herself, didn't offer help. She simply stared Angela down. "Ma'am, perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a check cashing place down the street," Jessica said, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Angela looked around. The customers had stopped pretending not to notice. The staff formed a semicircle behind Jessica, a wall of thinly veiled hostility. A middle-aged white man in line sighed theatrically. "Some of us have real banking to do," he grumbled, casting Angela a look heavy with disdain. Through it all, Angela remained rooted to the floor, her expression betraying nothing. No anger, no humiliation, only patience. A patience forged over a lifetime of moments exactly like this one. She could have raised her voice. She could have demanded immediate compliance, but she didn't. She pulled out her phone instead, calmly dialing. Her voice when she spoke was clear and professional. "Yes, this is Angela Freeman," she said, turning slightly away from Jessica, but remaining in full view of every camera. Richard mimicked her posture, sneering. Mark laughed. Beth fidgeted, guilt battling complicity in her hunched shoulders. Jessica's eyes narrowed. She didn't recognize the name Angela Freeman, or perhaps she chose not to. Either way, she waved over the security guard and instructed him to escort Angela out. The young guard hesitated. Something about the composed woman standing before him didn't align with the scenario his manager painted. Meanwhile, across the city, in Meridian Financial's glass-walled headquarters, Diane Porter, head of operations, was springing into action. Angela's call had been brief but devastatingly effective. Within minutes, security footage from the downtown branch was queued up for live review. Board members abandoned their meetings, screens flickered to life, faces paled as they watched their CEO being humiliated on her own premises. In the lobby, oblivious to the growing storm above them, Jessica sneered one final time. "People like you," she said loudly, "always think you know the rules better than we do." Angela didn't respond. She didn't have to. The reckoning was already on its way. The marble lobby of Meridian Financial's flagship branch stood unnaturally still. The tension clung to the air like static before a storm. Angela Freeman, still calm, slipped her phone back into her modest purse. Every movement she made was measured, deliberate. No outburst, no anger. Just an unsettling quiet that unnerved the staff more than any shouted protest ever could. Jessica Keller stood rigid behind the counter, arms crossed, misinterpreting Angela's calm for surrender. She nodded to the young security guard, Thomas, urging him forward with a curt jerk of her chin. "Escort her out," Jessica ordered, her voice snapping across the lobby. Thomas hesitated. His training manual had not prepared him for this. A woman impeccably polite, providing all proper documents, asking nothing but to access her own funds. What exactly was the violation here? Still, duty demanded action. He took a tentative step forward. It was at that precise moment the grand double doors of the lobby burst open. The noise startled everyone. Heads whipped around. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the sound of the cash-counting machines faltered as tellers abandoned pretense and stared. Through the towering doors strode Diane Porter, head of operations, her tailored navy suit sharp against the sterile marble. Behind her came a cadre of executives and senior managers, their expressions grim, their footsteps echoing across the vast lobby floor like approaching judgment. Jessica straightened, confusion flashing across her face. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of something he didn't yet fully understand. Mark, arms still folded defiantly across his chest, watched but said nothing, though his jaw tightened visibly. Diane didn't speak immediately. She didn't have to. Her presence spoke volumes. She moved with the certainty of someone wielding unchallengeable authority, her gaze fixed on Jessica with an intensity that could have frozen rivers. Finally, she spoke. One word, low but resonant enough to carry across the entire space. "Stop!" The simple command landed like a hammer. Jessica faltered mid-sentence, her mouth opening, then closing again, suddenly unsure of herself. The security guard froze in place, instinctively recognizing that this was no longer his situation to control. Diane's sharp heels clicked against the marble as she closed the distance to the center of the unfolding drama. She stopped directly beside Angela, positioning herself not as a neutral observer, but as an unmistakable ally. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Diane demanded, her voice cold, razor-edged. Jessica blinked, a bead of sweat forming at her temple. Richard and Mark exchanged quick, nervous glances. Beth's hands trembled visibly as she clutched the edge of her workstation. "This," Diane continued, sweeping her hand toward Angela, "is Angela Freeman." A murmur spread through the lobby. Several customers gasped audibly. Others leaned forward, mouths agape. A few even pulled out their phones to record what was happening, realizing they were witnessing something historic. "Angela Freeman," Diane repeated, "the CEO of Meridian Financial." Jessica staggered back as if physically struck, her face draining of color. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Her mind raced, replaying every dismissive glance, every condescending word she had uttered in the last 20 minutes. Richard stumbled backward, bumping into Mark, who had gone rigid, his arms falling limply to his sides. Beth covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Angela didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood there, serene, dignified. a living testament to grace under fire. Her mere presence was the loudest condemnation imaginable. Jessica's voice, when it finally returned, was a whisper of its former authority. I, I didn't know, she stammered. Diane's eyes hardened. You didn't bother to know, she corrected sharply. You judged, you assumed, and you humiliated not just a valued customer, but your boss, the leader of the very institution you claim to represent. The lobby watched, riveted, as Jessica visibly withered under the scrutiny. At the back of the branch, unnoticed until now, the branch's massive security monitor glowed brightly, cycling through footage captured that morning. It showed every incident, the differential treatment, the mocking whispers, the outright refusal of service, all preserved in high-definition clarity. Diane turned to address the entire staff. This is not just about one incident, she announced, her voice rising to fill every corner of the room. This is about a culture we allowed to fester, a culture that ends today. Angela nodded once, a subtle but decisive gesture, and just like that, the power shifted completely. The very people who had judged her unworthy now stood powerless before her. The true hierarchy had been revealed, and the consequences were about to begin. The weight of what had just been revealed settled into the bones of everyone present. Jessica Keller, still reeling, clung to the counter as if it might anchor her in a world that had shifted irreversibly beneath her feet. Richard leaned heavily against a pillar, eyes darting for a non-existent escape route. Mark, whose arms had once been folded so defiantly, now seemed smaller, diminished by the magnitude of his error. But this was only the beginning. Diane Porter took a tablet from one of the executives who had accompanied her. With a few taps, the security footage from the morning filled the massive television screen mounted behind the tellers. A screen that usually displayed promotional material about new accounts and mortgages. Now it played back their failures in brutal, unfiltered clarity. The lobby, once a place of polished presentations and polite transactions, had transformed into a courtroom. First, they saw the white businessman in an expensive suit, escorted immediately to a private desk with smiles and handshakes. Then the footage of the elderly Asian couple, left standing awkwardly near the entrance without even an offer of assistance. Next, a young white woman, laughing and joking with the teller while her check was processed in record time, followed immediately by the Hispanic maintenance worker, subjected to unnecessary scrutiny and additional ID checks. And finally, the footage everyone had seen unfold live. Angela Freeman's composed request to withdraw her own money being met with disdain, suspicion, and ultimately open discrimination. Whispers rippled through the lobby as customers watched the footage. Even those who had pretended not to notice earlier couldn't look away now. This can't be real, Richard muttered under his breath, but the evidence was irrefutable. Jessica tried one last, desperate tactic. She turned toward Diane, her voice trembling but defiant. We were just following security protocols for large cash withdrawals, she insisted. Diane's eyes narrowed into slits. You had 3 white customers withdraw sums larger than this today without a single question, she countered, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Not one ID rechecked, not one security alert triggered, not one accusation of fraud made. The only variable that changed was the color of the customer's skin. Jessica opened her mouth, but Diane raised a hand sharply. Enough! She turned her gaze back to the stunned lobby full of witnesses. For too long, Diane said, her voice carrying the weight of institutional failure, this bank has allowed unspoken biases to fester beneath a polished exterior. High-performing numbers masked toxic practices. Promotions were awarded based on superficial metrics, while real human dignity was ignored. Diane walked slowly down the row of tellers, each one lowering their gaze as she passed. We convinced ourselves that so long as the balance sheets looked good, we could ignore the rot growing underneath, she continued. But today it revealed itself, here, in our most visible branch, against our own CEO. The magnitude of it was dawning not just on the staff, but on the customers too. They weren't just witnessing an employee being reprimanded. They were watching a systemic rot, hidden and denied for years, dragged into the daylight. Jonathan Prescott, the chairman of the board, stepped forward. His voice, weathered but firm, filled the lobby. For every minority customer who left feeling unwelcome and unseen, he said, for every talented employee overlooked because they didn't fit someone's unspoken standard, for every opportunity we lost because of narrow minds at the front lines, we owe a reckoning. He turned to Angela with solemnity. And that reckoning begins today. Angela finally spoke. Her voice was low, steady, the calm in the center of the hurricane. This was never about one withdrawal. It was never just about one morning or one branch, she said. It's about who we are when no one is watching. It's about whether our values are just slogans on a wall or something we live every day. Around her, the staff listened in stunned silence. Some, like Beth, looked near tears. Others, like Richard and Mark, looked like men awaiting sentencing. Angela continued, her gaze sweeping the room. Change doesn't begin with press conferences. It begins right here, right now, with accountability. She gestured to Diane. Proceed. Diane nodded crisply. One by one, she called names. Jessica Keller, Richard Anders, Mark Feldman. Each name echoed like a verdict. You are hereby terminated for violation of Meridian Financial's core values, company policies, and federal anti-discrimination laws. Gasps escaped from the staff. Jessica's knees buckled slightly. Richard looked as though he might collapse. Mark simply stared ahead, eyes glassy. The security guard, Thomas, stepped forward. This time there was no hesitation. Quietly, professionally, he escorted the disgraced employees through the lobby and out the glass doors they had once guarded so fiercely against people they deemed unworthy. The doors closed behind them with a muted click. It was done. But for Meridian Financial, and for Angela Freeman, the real work was just beginning. The lobby was drenched in silence. For the first time that morning, there was no laughter, no whispers, no condescending smiles. Only the weight of realization pressing down on every soul present. Those who had once sneered now shifted uneasily. Those who had once chuckled nervously now looked at the floor, ashamed to meet anyone's gaze. Angela Freeman remained at the center of it all, not triumphant, but resolute. Her posture was straight, her expression composed, but in her eyes burned the unmistakable fire of someone who had waited her whole life for a moment like this. Not for revenge, but for change. Diane Porter tapped her tablet and summoned the remaining staff members to gather. They obeyed without hesitation now, forming an uneasy semicircle around Angela. Customers, too, lingered in the corners of the lobby, witnesses to a transformation they had not expected when they walked through the doors that morning. Angela let the silence stretch, forcing everyone to sit with their discomfort. Finally, she spoke. You've seen what injustice looks like, she said, her voice steady but cutting through the quiet like a bell. Now you're going to see what accountability feels like, and what real leadership demands. Beth, the young teller who had first interacted with Angela, trembled visibly. Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to maintain her composure. The confrontation had unmasked not only her colleagues but herself as well. She had witnessed wrong, felt it in her gut, and had done nothing. Angela turned her gaze on her, softening just slightly. Doing nothing when you know something is wrong, Angela said, looking directly at Beth, is also a choice. Beth flinched but nodded miserably, the truth of the words hitting harder than any reprimand. Nearby, Thomas, the young security guard, straightened his back, shoulders squaring. His conscience had warred against his orders, and though he had hesitated, he had ultimately chosen decency over blind obedience. It hadn't gone unnoticed. You, Angela said, meeting his eyes. You showed courage today. Thomas blinked in surprise. No one had ever called him courageous before. Not perfect, Angela continued, her voice firm but not unkind. But you paused, you questioned, and sometimes that's the start of change. Around them, the customers who had witnessed the spectacle were waking up too, to their own roles, their own complicity. Some had stood by silently as injustice played out. Others had whispered, judged, or looked away. But now, faced with the full truth of who Angela was and who they were, something in them was shifting. An elderly black man, still wearing his postal uniform, stepped forward hesitantly. Ma'am, he said, voice rough with emotion, I seen this happen too many times. I thought it was just how it always was. I'm sorry. Angela gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not absolution, but recognition of the hard truth he had voiced. Another voice, trembling but insistent, broke the stillness. I didn't say anything, a young white woman admitted, clutching her child's hand tightly. I knew it wasn't right, and I just kept quiet. I'm so sorry. It rippled outward then, a chain reaction of awakening, admissions, regrets, promises to do better. It was messy, imperfect, and raw, but it was real. Angela listened without judgment, only occasionally nodding, letting them bear the weight of their own revelations. She knew better than anyone that true change didn't come from forced apologies. It came when people saw themselves, clearly, painfully, and chose to become better. Now, Jonathan Prescott, the board chairman, cleared his throat and addressed the room. Every one of you who remains employed here today, he said, his voice heavy, has a choice to make. The standards going forward will not be the standards of yesterday. We will not hide behind numbers. We will not tolerate silent complicity. We will be better because we must. Angela stepped forward again, her presence commanding the room. In the coming weeks, she said, every branch, every employee, every process will be audited. Bias training will not be a box to check. It will be the foundation of your continued employment. Promotions, bonuses, and even basic job security will now be tied not only to performance metrics, but to equitable treatment of every customer. The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some faces showed resentment, others showed resignation. But in a few, in Beth, in Thomas, Angela saw something else. Hope, a spark of determination, the kindling of a fire that could burn away the old culture and replace it with something better. This is your moment, Angela said quietly, but it carried across the entire marble lobby. You can choose to be part of the solution, or you can step aside for those who will. The staff looked at one another, some in shame, some in defiance, but most with a dawning sense that the future of their careers and their institution was forever altered. Angela turned back toward Diane and the board members. Let's begin, she said. And with those simple words, the rebuilding of Meridian Financial truly started. Not just in its policies, but in the hearts of every witness who had seen the truth and could never again pretend they hadn't. Angela Freeman's words still lingered in the marble air of the lobby when Diane Porter signaled to the head of security. Archive everything, Diane instructed, her voice low but urgent. Full footage, audio files, access logs, employee chat records, everything from the past 48 hours. The security team, already on high alert, sprang into action. In the adjacent observation room, a flurry of technicians worked feverishly. Bank security systems, which once served merely as silent witnesses to injustice, now became tools of accountability. Angela turned toward Thomas, the young security guard who had shown rare courage earlier. I'll need a written report from you detailing exactly what happened today, including who said what, when, and how you responded, she said, her tone brisk but respectful. Thomas nodded, a determined set to his jaw. For the first time since the ordeal began, he realized he could help shape the narrative, not just for himself, but for all who had watched and waited, unsure if doing the right thing was ever safe. Diane moved swiftly through the stunned crowd, speaking into her headset. Pull complaint files for the downtown branch from the last 2 years, she ordered. Filter by race, ethnicity, and outcome. I want patterns. I want names. Upstairs in the executive suite, more board members and department heads had assembled, called down urgently from their offices. Screens flickered as customer complaints, flagged transactions, and internal disciplinary records were displayed in real time. The emerging pattern was staggering. Minority customers flagged for suspicious activity at rates 6 times higher than white customers. Loan applications from Black-owned businesses consistently delayed or lost. Service surveys glowing with praise when completed by white customers, but brimming with frustration from customers of color, complaints that had been systematically down-prioritized or quietly deleted under Jessica Keller's management. In the lobby, Angela reviewed a preliminary incident report handed to her by a junior compliance officer who had rushed from headquarters. This is just the surface, the officer said quietly, his face pale. We're finding discrepancies in multiple departments connected to this branch. Angela scanned the document, her sharp mind piecing together the deeper implications. This wasn't just a bad day, she said aloud, voice slicing through the whispers that filled the room. This was a culture. Diane nodded grimly beside her. We're going to expose it all, she vowed. From hiring practices to daily interactions, no stone left unturned. Across the lobby, Beth, the teller who had frozen when injustice unfolded, stood uncertainly at the edge of the gathering. She clutched a sheaf of papers, printouts from the branch's internal complaint log. Guilt gnawed at her, but so did a growing resolve. Tentatively, she approached Angela. I found something, Beth said, her voice trembling. I saved these because I thought maybe someday someone would listen. Angela took the documents and scanned them. They were internal complaints made by customers who had walked away unheard, many written by hand, some typed in frustration, each one neatly filed but buried deep where no one had ever followed up. One complaint caught Angela's eye. Staff refused to honor my withdrawal despite proper identification. Made me feel like a criminal. I was treated differently from other customers. I will be closing my accounts. Dates, names, details, all aligned precisely with what Angela had witnessed firsthand that morning. She handed the papers to Diane without hesitation. Add these to the investigation file, Angela ordered. Flag them for priority review. Beth flinched, fearing rebuke, but Angela paused and looked her squarely in the eyes. You should have spoken up sooner, Angela said evenly, but you're speaking up now. It matters. It counts. Beth nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Meanwhile, the board members convened in a side room, debating the immediate next steps. Several argued for a quiet internal inquiry, a PR-managed apology, a return to business as usual. But Angela's earlier resolve had fortified Diane, and the few allies determined to confront the full rot. If we cover this up, Diane said icily, addressing the room, we become complicit. The room fell silent. We need a third-party audit, Angela added, stepping into the boardroom, uninvited but wholly welcome. Independent investigators, full transparency, and we inform the regulators ourselves before the media forces our hand. Board Chairman Jonathan Prescott looked at her, a mixture of apprehension and admiration in his gaze. You understand, he said slowly, this will be brutal, for the institution, for our reputation. Angela met his gaze squarely. And necessary, she replied without blinking. Reputation built on lies isn't worth saving. There was no more debate. The decision was made. Meridian Financial would conduct a sweeping, independent audit into its branches, policies, and culture. Angela would oversee it personally. The customers who had once been brushed aside would now have a seat at the table, their voices no longer easily ignored. Back downstairs, as the lobby began to empty, some customers leaving shaken but hopeful, some staff quietly packing their things, Angela stood firm, reviewing documents, directing orders, and building the foundation for something new. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. And the evidence, every hateful smirk, every biased decision, every papered-over complaint, was finally coming to light. At exactly 11:45 a.m., with the lobby of Meridian Financial's flagship branch still humming from the morning's chaos, Angela Freeman gathered every remaining employee into the central customer lounge. Security officers discreetly locked the main entrance. Diane Porter stationed herself at Angela's side, her presence an unspoken declaration. The time for private warnings was over. What would happen now would be public, final, and irreversible. Jessica Keller, Richard, and Mark had already been terminated and escorted out, but many of their peers, those who had stood by, those who had stayed silent, remained, caught between fear and guilt. Their faces flickered between pale anxiety and stubborn defensiveness. Angela did not stand on the platform. She stood with them, on the marble floor, her posture tall and composed. No need for elevation. Her authority came from a deeper place, earned, not demanded. She began, her voice low but caring. What happened today is bigger than any one transaction, any one interaction. It's about who we are when no one is watching. Murmurs rippled through the group. Some staff shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced toward the cameras they now knew had recorded their every move. You didn't just fail me, Angela continued, voice sharpening. You failed every customer who ever trusted us to treat them with dignity. Her words struck like hammer blows, measured, precise, and devastating. Angela turned to Beth, the young teller who had faltered but ultimately tried to make it right. You recognized it, Angela said. You knew. Beth swallowed hard, her cheeks burning with shame. And what did you do? Angela asked, not cruelly, but piercingly. I froze, Beth whispered. I didn't know how to stop it. Angela nodded slowly. Freezing is human, she said, but silence enables injustice. Every system of discrimination survives because good people choose comfort over courage. She let that sentence hang, heavy and unblinking. The room was utterly silent. Even the clacking of keyboards from the customer counters had ceased. Angela turned her gaze to the others. Mark, Richard, Jessica. They were obvious, easy to blame, easy to point to. But what about the rest of you? Her voice was softer now, but it cut deeper. You witnessed, you whispered, you recorded videos. But did you intervene? A few staff members dropped their eyes. Others bit their lips. Some clutched their ID badges as if they could hide behind the corporate logo stitched onto them. I am not here today to shame you, Angela said, voice shifting again, now steadier, almost kind. I am here to challenge you. She stepped forward, closer, her presence magnetic. Each of you will have a choice, she continued. Own your role in what happened. Be honest. Be willing to confront the part of you that let this happen. And if you do, if you commit to real change, you may have a future here. She turned slightly toward Diane, who nodded and held up a thick stack of papers. Every staff member will receive a personal review file, Diane announced crisply. Your behaviors today and in past months have been documented. You'll meet one-on-one with compliance officers. You'll undergo equity and ethics retraining, and you will be evaluated not just on your performance, but on your integrity. And if we refuse, a man near the back asked. His voice was defiant, but his stance betrayed fear. Angela didn't flinch. Then you will find employment elsewhere, she said simply, effective immediately. No threat, no anger, just fact. The man said nothing more. Angela scanned the room again, her gaze steady. Some of you may think what happened here today was extreme, she said, that it was just one bad moment. But systems are not broken by accidents. They are exposed by them. Her voice dropped, intense and intimate. And today, you were exposed. Silence pressed heavier than the marble columns around them. Angela took a final step forward. I built my career at this bank, she said, from teller to CEO. Every promotion, every achievement, every client relationship, I earned it. And I will not allow Meridian Financial to be a place where others like me are told they don't belong. The emotional charge in her words was undeniable. Several employees blinked rapidly, struggling against rising tears. This institution is at a crossroads, Angela finished. We either become the organization we claim to be, or we crumble into irrelevance and shame. She let that sink in. You have 1 week, Diane added sharply. 1 week to decide. Commit to change or walk away. Angela looked around one last time, meeting as many eyes as she could. This is your moment, she said. Use it. Then, without waiting for applause or permission, she turned and walked away, Diane following closely behind. The message was clear. The confrontation was over. The transformation had begun. The ripple effects from that moment inside the flagship branch spread faster than anyone could have predicted. By noon, Diane Porter had already activated the emergency escalation protocols across the entire network of Meridian Financial branches nationwide. An emergency conference call was scheduled with all regional directors, district managers, and compliance officers. Angela Freeman herself chaired it, her voice projected into hundreds of meeting rooms, laptops, and speakerphones simultaneously. This is not an isolated incident, she began without preamble. This is a systemic failure, and systemic failures demand systemic solutions. The tone was uncompromising. No scripted PR statements, no half-hearted acknowledgments. Angela laid bare the truth. Meridian Financial had, for too long, fostered a culture where appearances were valued over service, where certain customers were prized and others politely or impolitely pushed away. We have reviewed internal metrics across 48 months, Angela said. The disparities in service quality are not anomalies. They are patterns, patterns that end today. There was no room for interpretation. No one on that call could pretend they hadn't heard her. The directives were clear and swift. Every branch manager nationwide would undergo an immediate performance audit. Branches with high complaint rates, high minority attrition rates, or disproportionate approval gaps would be placed under provisional oversight. Bonuses and promotions would be frozen across the network, pending the results of individual equity compliance evaluations. A full-scale external audit team, independent of Meridian's leadership, would be embedded into daily operations to report findings directly to the board. Employees found complicit in discriminatory practices, even through silence, would face disciplinary action up to and including termination. The reaction across the company was explosive. In downtown offices in Chicago, Houston, New York, and Los Angeles, hastily convened meetings buzzed with confusion, anger, fear, and in some quarters, quiet hope. Some employees muttered about unfairness, about being judged retroactively. Others finally felt vindicated, their unspoken experiences at last acknowledged. At the Los Angeles regional headquarters, an internal email thread leaked within minutes. It showed senior managers frantically trying to scrub years' worth of insensitive emails, jokes, and questionable decisions from their company servers. But the damage was done. Independent auditors already had full backups of every communication from the past 5 years. By 2 p.m., social media was ablaze. The video footage of Angela's undercover ordeal had gone viral, viewed by over 12 million people and counting. Hashtags like "Jutturn Banking While Black," "Meridian Accountability," and "Justice for Angela" trended simultaneously across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Financial news outlets picked up the story with breathless speed. CEO exposes her own bank's discrimination and takes action live. Angela Freeman shatters the corporate playbook and possibly saves Meridian's future. Op-eds flooded the internet, hailing Angela Freeman as a once-in-a-generation leader willing to challenge the deeply ingrained rot that others had ignored. Meanwhile, in branches across America, customers began to take notice. Some, inspired by the video, walked into their local Meridian branches just to see if things felt different. Others demanded meetings with branch managers to discuss their own experiences of microaggressions or unfair treatment. Customer service call volumes tripled overnight, with agents fielding emotional testimonials, complaints, and, for the first time in years, cautious words of encouragement. Outside forces moved quickly, too. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau launched an immediate inquiry. Civil rights groups issued statements calling for accountability and for replication of Angela's model across the banking industry. Competing banks scrambled to revise their diversity training programs before scrutiny turned toward them. Inside Meridian's flagship branch, the very site of the original humiliation, there was no returning to business as usual. The marble floors that had once gleamed with hollow prestige now reflected something rawer and more honest. Temporary signage announced shorter banking hours due to staff retraining. Half the tellers were missing, suspended pending investigation. New posters lined the walls showcasing diverse leadership and boldly stating, "Respect is not optional." Staff were now required to complete extensive customer service modules, focusing not just on procedures, but on implicit bias, active listening, and equitable treatment. Role-playing exercises, supervised by external facilitators, forced employees to confront their own unconscious prejudices. In New York's prestigious Midtown branch, a once revered manager resigned voluntarily rather than submit to the new compliance regimen. Others gritted their teeth and began the grueling work of dismantling and rebuilding their behaviors and mindsets. Angela Freeman made surprise visits to branches unannounced. In Philadelphia, she witnessed a Hispanic customer being greeted with warm professionalism by a newly retrained teller. In Dallas, she sat quietly and watched as an elderly Black woman was offered not only respectful service, but proactive financial planning assistance. Small victories, seeds of change. But Angela knew the real battle was against the inertia of old habits, against the comforting myths that institutions tell themselves. As she reviewed daily compliance reports late into the night, her mind never drifted toward triumph. It stayed focused on one question. Would Meridian Financial truly transform, or would it merely polish its image and wait for the world to forget? Angela intended to make sure forgetting was not an option. Not now. Not ever. The real work of rebuilding began not with grand speeches or sweeping gestures, but in the small, uncomfortable moments that tested the soul of Meridian Financial. Angela Freeman understood that genuine reform demanded more than press conferences and policy memos. It required resetting expectations at every level, from the boardroom to the teller line. It required transforming the culture itself. Her first move was radical. She announced a 48-hour full operational pause across all domestic branches. For 2 full business days, Meridian Financial would stop all customer-facing operations. The interruption was unprecedented. Billions in transactions delayed. Entire teams redeployed from sales and service to training rooms and auditoriums. Angela faced heavy internal resistance. "You'll destroy customer confidence," some executives protested. "We'll lose millions in revenue," others cried. But Angela stood firm. "If we can't afford 2 days to repair the foundation of our values," she said bluntly in an emergency leadership summit, "then we don't deserve a single customer's trust." The shutdown was chaotic, but it was also transformative. In downtown conference rooms normally reserved for client pitches, employees sat in circles, stripped of titles and hierarchy, engaging in facilitated discussions about privilege, prejudice, and bias. Real conversations, honest ones, not the sanitized corporate scripted variety. Employees shared personal stories of exclusion, of assumptions, of missed opportunities to act with courage. Some cried, some grew angry. Many simply listened for the first time. Across the country, employees who had once thought of discrimination as a rare anomaly came to see it for what it was, a constant undertow, silent but powerful, shaping interactions, opportunities, and trust. Angela participated in sessions anonymously, blending in with groups of junior staff, hearing firsthand the doubts and hopes stirring within the ranks. "I used to think racism was just about hate," a young loan officer confessed during a session in Atlanta. "I never thought about it being baked into everyday assumptions, like who looks trustworthy or professional." In Seattle, a longtime branch manager admitted, with visible shame, that he had once dismissed a qualified Black woman's application for a small business loan because something about her plan didn't feel solid, though he could never explain what. Story by story, realization by realization, the true rebuilding began. Angela wasn't just content with shifting hearts. She institutionalized the transformation. She rewrote the company's performance evaluation frameworks. Moving forward, promotions would be tied not just to sales targets, but to verified equity metrics. How consistently did employees provide excellent service to every customer, regardless of appearance? How effectively did managers cultivate inclusive, respectful branch cultures? Regional bonuses were recalibrated too. Districts that showed measurable improvements in equitable outcomes, not just profits, would receive top awards. Meanwhile, the recruitment system underwent a ground-up overhaul. Gone were the vague culture fit interviews that had subtly weeded out diverse candidates. New structured interviews focused on objective competencies and values alignment, with diverse panels required at every hiring stage. Within 6 months, 37% of new hires came from historically underrepresented backgrounds, a measurable shift from the 18% figure just a year prior. Outside Meridian's glass towers, the world took notice. Civil rights organizations cited the bank as a model of corporate accountability done right. Regulators praised their transparency. Customers returned, tentatively at first, then in growing waves. A Gallup poll found that public trust in Meridian Financial had surged by 26%, an unheard-of recovery after such a public scandal. Even Wall Street responded. After an initial dip, Meridian's stock not only recovered, but climbed higher than its pre-scandal levels. Investors appreciated that Angela's reforms were not just ethical, they were good business. In the midst of it all, Angela never lost sight of the human cost. She personally oversaw the creation of the Second Chance Employment Program, a pathway for terminated employees like Jessica, Richard, and Mark to undergo intensive retraining and counseling, offering the possibility of eventual re-entry into the workforce. Accountability did not preclude redemption. Beth, the young teller whose early discomfort had signaled a conscience still intact, became one of the program's most vocal ambassadors. Promoted to permanent branch manager after a successful interim period, she led workshops teaching frontline staff how to recognize and interrupt bias in real time. And customers noticed. At the flagship branch where it all began, an elderly black man stood at the counter one afternoon, tears in his eyes as he completed a loan application for the small bakery he had dreamed of opening for years. "I didn't think people like me could walk in here and be treated with respect," he told Beth, voice trembling. "But today you proved me wrong." Beth smiled, handing him the approved papers. "Everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are," she said. Angela visited that branch quietly a few weeks later. She sat unnoticed in the back, watching the interactions, the genuine smiles, the patient explanations, the quiet dignity with which every customer was greeted. This was no longer a facade of respectability built atop old prejudices. This was the beginning of something real, the beginning of a culture reborn. The transformation of Meridian Financial did not happen overnight, nor was it perfect, but it was profound. 6 months after the humiliating events that shook the institution to its core, Angela Freeman stood once again behind a podium, this time not at a press conference, but at an internal leadership summit attended by over 2,000 managers from across the country. The ballroom buzzed with energy, a far cry from the shell-shocked silence that had gripped the flagship branch on that fateful day. Angela paused before she spoke, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle over the room. "You have heard a lot about change," she began, her voice steady but rich with emotion. "Today, I want to talk about legacy." The room quieted instantly. "A legacy," Angela continued, "is not built through our intentions. It is built through our actions, our choices, and, most importantly, how we respond when we realize we were wrong." She let that linger. "You've seen the footage. You've read the reports. You know the truth. What happened to me that day wasn't unique. It was a symptom of something that was allowed to fester because we were too focused on metrics, not enough on meaning." Heads nodded throughout the crowd. Some executives sat rigid, visibly grappling with the uncomfortable but necessary self-awareness. "We believed that if our numbers looked good, we were good," Angela said. "But reality lives in the spaces between numbers. It lives in the glance dismissed, the voice ignored, the potential overlooked." She leaned forward slightly, the weight of her personal experience fueling every word. "My presence in that branch wasn't a test," she said. "It wasn't a trap. It was a mirror. And what it reflected wasn't just the failure of a few employees. It was the reflection of what we, as leaders, tolerated." A heavy silence blanketed the room. "And so," Angela continued, voice rising, "we had a choice. We could defend ourselves, minimize, deny, or we could confront it head on and build something better." She gestured toward the massive screens flanking the stage, which now displayed a series of slides, metrics, graphs, faces of employees and customers. "In the last 6 months," she said, "we've seen the fruits of that choice." Customer satisfaction across all demographics had risen by 23%. Loan approvals for minority-owned businesses had doubled. Employee diversity at every level of leadership had increased by 18%. Anonymous surveys revealed a 37% improvement in employees' belief that Meridian was committed to fairness. "But those numbers," Angela said, "are only the beginning." She paused, looking out over the crowd, not as an aloof executive, but as a leader fully present with her people. "Every customer who walks into our branches deserves dignity, not because it's good for business, but because it's the right thing to do. Every employee deserves to be evaluated based on their talents, their integrity, their work, not their appearance. Every decision we make, from the front lines to this very room, must answer one question: does it build the kind of institution we are proud to serve?" The applause started slowly, hesitant, then swelled to a standing ovation. Angela let them applaud for a moment before raising a hand. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said when the room quieted again. "I am asking for vigilance, for humility, for courage." She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that softened the sternness of her message. "Courage," she repeated, "because true progress doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from facing it and choosing differently." The screen behind her changed again, this time showing a simple, powerful phrase: "Respect is not optional. Dignity is not negotiable. Fairness is not conditional." Angela concluded, "Our legacy will not be written by how we responded to success. It will be written by how we responded to failure. And let it be said that when we were faced with a mirror, we did not look away." The entire room rose again, this time not out of obligation, but conviction. As the summit ended, Angela walked off the stage not into isolation, but into a sea of employees, branch managers, junior tellers, loan officers, all eager to greet her, to thank her, to pledge themselves to the better Meridian Financial they were building together. Meanwhile, across the country, customers walked into Meridian branches and saw something new. Smiles that were real, assistance that was eager, not reluctant, service that respected them as individuals, not stereotypes, small interactions, quiet revolutions. A Latina entrepreneur opening her first business account without facing condescension, a Black father securing a home loan without extra hurdles, an Asian American student greeted warmly at the teller counter instead of being scrutinized. The changes weren't dramatic like the day Angela was denied her withdrawal. They were subtle, patient, steady, exactly the way real, lasting justice grows. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Justice isn't just what you fight for when everyone is watching. It's how you treat people when no one is. Angela Freeman knew that legacy wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about what you built in their aftermath. And under her leadership, Meridian Financial was not just repairing trust. They were building something worthy of it, forever.